Good morning. Actually, it's afternoon. Good afternoon, Wednesday afternoon with Group A. Our last Wednesday afternoon together. And I'm so glad to be here with all of you guys. I haven't been teaching the last couple of weeks. You've been with Christine, and I've missed you. So it's hard to believe that we've been together for the last 16 weeks working with Sundance Vacations with you and your team. And I just wanted to take a moment to express my gratitude that this group has stuck it out. You guys have attended each week. A lot of your names I am very familiar with. Some of your faces, because most of you still don't open up the video camera, which is fine. But I just wanted you to know how much we've enjoyed working with all of you, how much we've all, Christine and I and Sarah, who you guys don't get to see on camera, but is actively involved with servicing your account with the supportive materials and the platform. And there's a few more people on the team that we just have all learned so much in this process. And we look forward to not only encouraging you moving forward to continue these practices, to continue using what you've learned, and to continue supporting you so that you feel that you could really lean into these things that you've learned, into developing all of these resources internally so that you, feel that you could better manage stress as it moves in and out, so that you could better anchor into your breath in any given moment. Hi, Mari. That you could better, manage life. What I think is important to express here is that these are our inner practices. These are what we're sharing with you. These are daily practices that I use personally that have helped me tremendously. Both Christine and I have been teaching to students in groups like yours for a very long time. And what we both know and truly believe is that if you stick it out, if you carve away just a short amount of time, because the reality is sometimes I only have 3 to 5 minutes to really drop into these practices when life feels really busy or overwhelming. But just in those 3 to 5 minutes, it could shift me out of a negative mind state into a very positive one, or the negative or unskillful thoughts, which we're going to really drill down into today, can still be there. And I could still acknowledge them, know that they're there, but I'm still able to kind of ground into a space that feels centered and open and responsive, instead of, just being reactive or saying things that I might regret, or behaving in a way that may not be fully aligned with who I am inside, just because I might have too much going on. So trust these practices, and trust that if you commit to moving forward tomorrow, today, and using what you've learned, really trusting in the practices and methods and techniques that have you feel connected with, that you've learned through this process, that you will continue to grow and transform in these practices. And it never ends. There's this saying or slogan that my teacher often mentions, and it's called the groundless ground. So you learn the practice, you implement the practice, you commit to the practice, and you notice these changes happening, and you feel better. And you think, oh, well, I've reached this stage of development where the practices are working. And then you realize, oh, there's so much more to learn, right? And that just keeps happening. You keep developing into these stages of development where it only gets better and better. You don't ever go in reverse, in other words. You just keep dropping into depth and you reach this depth of understanding, this inner science that we're doing, this inner landscape that we're looking at, and we begin to gather these insights and develop wisdom and really develop trust that, you know, wow, I could handle a little bit more now. I could trust that I'm able to remain steady in any given situation. And that depth just, it keeps increasing, right? So it just keeps getting better, truly, trust. So lesson 8, week 8, the third foundation of mindfulness is our lesson today, and it's mindfulness of the mind. Mindfulness of the mind. So what does that mean? What we've started, where we started. So because this is the last lesson, I think it's important to talk about the different things that we've learned and how it applies to kind of pulling it all together today in mindfulness of mind. Anchoring, developing an anchor in the breath, using the breath as a tool to ground and center into, to return to. Noticing when we're distracted in our formal practices, noticing when we're distracted in life, right? So not limiting mindfulness or the awareness, present moment awareness, to just this formal practice time. That's really important. If there's one takeaway from today's lesson, that's it, right? We don't want to limit what we think of mindfulness to be. It's the formal practices help us neurologically. They really anchor in these strategies that we're using, and we begin to really trust. They're so important. But mindfulness is a state of being that we could achieve. Present moment awareness is a state of being that we could achieve in any given moment. And if you're like me, I notice time to time, from time to time throughout each and every single day, that I've been pulled away from the moment at hand. And that's important to recognize, because these are important moments. You only get one shot, right? So when we're in an important, beautiful moment with our family or friends, when we're in a beautiful moment walking through a beautiful field or seeing a sunset or looking at a canyon or opening to the sea on vacation, do you really want to be distracted with a thought that doesn't even matter? Just a thought that the mind is having? A story that the mind might be telling us? No. We want to really be in that moment. So all of these practices, pulling our attention back into the breath, using the body, the sensations of the body, mindfulness of the body, all the body practices that we talked about, mindfulness of feelings, noticing when we're entangled in a difficult emotion, noticing when sadness is present, noticing when anger is moving through us, and remaining steady instead of pouncing, right? And sometimes that's really, really hard. We all know that. It could be really, really hard. But the more moments that we're successful, when we notice whatever's coming in, whatever trigger's coming in, and we create that little bit of space between the stimulus and the response, that's where the freedom resides. Christine talked about that last week. That space, that pause, is where we have the freedom to decide how we're going to respond in this moment. Mindfulness, moment-to-moment awareness, is an opportunity for us to drop from the busyness of the mind that is very busy, right? Very distracted, especially in the year 2019. And we drop from this busyness happening down into the body, down into the heart. And that's really what these practices, when we look at the practices together, that's what all of the practices do. They move us from the busyness of the mind to living in this space of always trying to figure things out, right? Always trying to make sense of what's happening right now, into just being in the experience of living. And that's where I want to be. right now I'm here with all of you, right? And we're here together, and you guys might be multitasking. I don't know. You know, you might have me on mute. I don't know. I hope not. But what I can tell you is right now I'm fully immersed in this teaching with all of you, with each of you. So that's what we're talking about today. So what does it mean to move from the mind to the heart? In traditional practices, they say there's 1,000 skillful means, right? So the Buddha himself was a list maker. So he made all these lists of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the, four mind changings and the four foundations of mindfulness, what we've based this training off of. These 1,000 skillful means, probably hundreds of thousands of skillful means. Because these skillful means, these ways in which we feel most connected into the reality of life happening right now, any which way that gets you there is a skillful means. For me, I'm particularly connected to nature. So feeling blades of grass against my skin on my feet is a skillful mean to drop me into present moment awareness. And that's certainly not something that anyone had to teach me. It's just something I know to be true, right? So pay attention to the skillful means that drop you there, that take you from the thinking through life into actually experiencing life. What is it that's most important to you? What is it that drops you in? What pulls you into really feeling into this life? Those are the things that I want you to pay attention to. Why do we want to do that? Because when we're able to make ourselves, when we're able to drop into full present moment awareness, we're able to make ourselves more available and connected and open and curious and interested, not only in the moment that we're in, but in that connection with the people around us. This interconnectedness is a central theme in the practices because we need each other. We're not meant to experience life on our own, right? This idea of learning to be with the mind, of learning to observe the mind as more of a witness instead of feeling completely entangled in the thoughts of the mind is really radical. It's a truly radical idea. So when we pause in meditation and we practice this formal method of observing the mind and the inner workings of the mind, how the mind is thinking, noticing how thoughts are moving through, what thought is there right now, how the thought drops in, how the thought climaxes, how long it stays, and how it passes through, how the thought leaves or dissipates. So when we're observing that process of the mind's thinking and the ways in which the mind thinks, that's radical, because then who is witnessing the mind's thinking? Who is that witness? Let's take a moment for a short practice so we could have an experience of that right now, okay? So wherever you are, I want you to sit up nice and tall in your seat. If you'd prefer standing, you could certainly stand. If you're at home and would like to just lay down, you could do that too. I invite you to close your eyes and rest your hands down on your lap. And just take a moment to really notice your body in this seat. Your feet landing on the ground. Notice your sit bones grounding. See if you can feel really weighted in any parts of you that are touching or landing. So whether you're sitting or standing or laying down, any parts of you that are touching the seat or the ground, just allow those pieces and parts to feel heavy. And from the heaviness of the foundation grounding you, notice the lightness of the breath. Notice the lightness in the heart space, the tall, noble spine. Just checking in and allowing any sounds of life happening as a backdrop to this experience. Connecting with an anchor, whether that's in the breath or a sensation in the hands or another part of the body. Just establishing that anchor for this practice. And now turning your attention inward and observing thoughts happening. See if you can really notice the next thought that drops into the mind's eye. Also notice absence of thought if the mind feels very calm right now. Notice if the thought feels quick, light, long, heavy, busy, clear, chaotic. Notice if you've already moved ahead a few thoughts or are entangled in a long story. Note any particular theme, pattern, color, picture, word, or sensation in the body. And with the next thought that you notice, see if you can just stay with it until that particular thought fades away. Now dropping or returning back to the anchor that you established. in the beginning. And now gently opening your eyes. So just this experience of witnessing the mind thinking, radically transformative. We begin to really understand our own unique inner landscape. The more we turn to this practice, we can learn our own patterns. We can really understand. Paying attention to this idea of each practice, each formal practice being an opportunity to just drop into this inner curiosity of paying attention, this inner study, really this inner science. It's almost like saying, okay, I'm going to take the next 5 minutes to see what exactly is here what's here right now. What am I hosting inside? What sensations am I hosting in my body? What feelings am I hosting in my heart? Mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of emotion. How is my breath now? What thoughts am I hosting within my mind? What is the quality of my mind now? And then we begin to really see how the mind and the emotions and the body all work together. So when we're holding on to a particularly stressful thought, something we're ruminating on, for instance, something we're worried about, how does that feel in the heart? What sensations do I notice in my body when I allow for some curiosity and interest? And then taking a moment to return to the breath and notice the quality of the breath, and notice if the quality of the breath has been affected with this inner looking. And we begin to really realize and understand and trust that, wow, this is all interconnected. It's very hard to separate. And that's the inner landscape. That's the inner study that we're talking about. So how do we kind of look at all of this, and where do we start, and what practices get us to that point? Okay, so I want to read a quote. It is by the Buddha. Remember, the Buddha was known as the first psychologist. He was really a scientist. Everything that he asked us to do with these mind trainings, he never claimed to be a religious leader. He never wanted to be looked at that way. He wanted to help people understand the ways in which these practices could reduce suffering in your life. He wanted these tools to teach each of us how to work with the mind and not eliminate their minds, not try to push things away, just working with things just as they are right now. And that's really the definition of mindfulness. So this quote is from the Buddha. Who is your enemy? Said the Buddha. Mind is your enemy. No one can harm you more than a mind untrained. Who is your friend? Mind is your friend. No one can assist you and care for you better than your mind well trained. Not even the most loving mother or father. So it really drops the responsibility back onto each of us, because this is a job to do, right? It's a responsibility. So how do we do this? Seeing and knowing this inner thought landscape, how can we practice to really understand more about ourselves? So the first thing we could do is just name or note the thoughts, right? We can name or note, and that's similar to kind of what we just went through. So we were noticing if there was a style of thinking. So there's all kinds of ways that the mind thinks. The mind learns and gathers insight. The mind could get us to be very creative. the mind can really get concentrated on thoughts that we're trying to kind of figure out. The mind learns and gathers insight and remembers and projects, right? There's all different ways in which the mind thinks. Word thoughts, picture thoughts, color thoughts, numbers. Some people see numbers a lot when they're thinking. Some people are really able to visualize. Especially you may have noticed this with some of the visualization practices we've introduced, right? That, oh, I really connected here. And some of you may have a really hard time with that. And that doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It just means that your mind is probably going to do better with a different method, right? It may not be the method for you right now, right? Because that could change too. So I've experienced that personally, where I've come to a conclusion about something that was serving me and kind of dismissed these other ways in which to drop in. And then I've noticed as time goes on, as I understand more, I now have more access to these other methods. So it's always about figuring out what's working right now, not what worked in the past, not what worked yesterday even, or even 5 minutes ago, right? When we drill down to it, right? It's not making assumptions about how things are. It's the reality of how things are right now. And that right now passes by, and it keeps passing by. So we're asked to continually look. So that style of thinking is important. What are the patterns? We want to notice those patterns, right? Typically, the patterns will either center around future thoughts, worrying, planning ahead. Those future thoughts can cause some anxiety and fear, right? Often connected there into that space in the heart. Ruminating thoughts on the past, on remembering, or nostalgia. So especially in the midst of loss of any kind, certain holidays or events or things like that, we can really notice that the mind just keeps going back, taking us back, remembering. And that could often, if we're stuck in those patterns of either projecting forward into the future and living with this sense of worry or anticipation or even excitement, right? It doesn't always have to be something difficult. I remember when I was getting married, and I was so excited, and I was driving down 81, and I've been married twice. This is my second marriage, and I had my kids in the back seat, and I was so excited about the wedding. It was coming up in a few months, and I was driving down 81 to try to get to the 309 exit, and I ended up in Scranton. I went an extra 20 miles without catching that I passed my exit, and I was, because I was so excited thinking about my wedding. So that's what I mean about lost in thought, and we've all experienced it. So that anticipation and excitement can take us out of our life, out of present moment awareness, and quite frankly, could have been very dangerous. Okay? So we could always layer this understanding. So when we're noticing that we've been kind of stuck in this pattern of thinking about future or past, right? Instead of getting hypercritical on catching that happening, we could just layer it with some metta, with some loving awareness, right? Compassion. This is what the mind does. The mind thinks. That's its job, right? My right hand's job is to, be my dominant hand and be strong and lift things and touch. My hand doesn't think. My mind's job is not to touch or lift or carry or do any of those things. My mind's job is to think. And that's what the mind's doing. You may also catch yourself stuck in certain themes, What are themes? Love, loss, what we just talked about. But also comparing thoughts, judging thoughts, critical thinking, right? When we're stuck in that negative mind pattern, where instead of kind of accepting the reality of the situation just as it is, the mind immediately drops into a negative pattern. Or for those of you that are, the glass is half empty or the glass is half full. So I try to stay in that half full side, but sometimes it doesn't, when my mind's constantly thinking that, oh, things are going to be fine, this will work out, all these positive mind thoughts could keep me from seeing the reality, or I might miss something that I should be concerned about because I just want everything to be okay. So that's what I mean by themes, right? And these thoughts, these themes, they often make us feel separated. They make us feel separate from each other, especially comparing thoughts, especially judging thoughts, right? As social media is a massive problem here, because we go on to Instagram, and I'm guilty of it, and I'll be scrolling through my feed and I'll see, the story of a mom who is fit and eating everything perfectly and, canning all her vegetables and gardening and jumping around with her kids. And then I feel guilty. I feel less than. It makes me feel separate and not good enough. Right? But that's not reality. And, not only are we confronted with this sense of comparing and judgment, and it could be comparing and judgment outward, and it could be comparing and judgment inward, but our children are so confronted with this that it's causing issues, massive issues. There's two quotes that are relevant here. One is by Thomas Merton, and he was a Christian mystic. And he said, "Of what avail is it if we could travel to the moon, if we cannot cross the abyss that separates us from ourselves and from one another?" Of what avail is it if we could travel to the moon, if we cannot cross the abyss, this space that separates us from ourselves and from another? So this idea of being lost in this thought, right? Lost in thoughts. And Nisargadatta, I'm saying his name wrong, Nisargadatta, he said, "The mind creates the abyss and the heart crosses it." So the mind creates the separateness. The mind creates that. It could be learned. It could be assumed. It could be something that we've experienced, a pattern, right, that makes us feel separate from each other. And the only part of ourselves that has the courage to cross that abyss, to connect, is the heart. So remember, taking our awareness from the mind into the heart, dropping into the heart, dropping into the body. Whenever we catch ourselves in those mind themes or thoughts or patterns that make us feel separate or less than, all right, dropping into the heart. Because the heart, the spaciousness of the heart, the capacity of the heart to love and be compassionate and kind, it's not a capacity that we can even understand. It's well beyond. The capacity of the heart is boundless. So we could trust that. So we have repetitious thoughts that we always have. I told the Monday night group that when I sit to meditate, you know, the first 5 minutes, you might notice a lot of busyness. That's when I practice mindfulness of mind. And I notice these top 10 tunes, these top 10 themes that run through my mind. And it's just like, oh, there you are again, right? There's that thought again. And here's my top 10. Oh, worried about my son traveling. There you are, right? I bow to you, acknowledge, right? Let that thought pass. I told them, you know, I'm embarrassed to say, but I have curly, crazy hair and it's extremely hard to manage. And so I always think about how's my hair going to, how am I going to manage my hair today? That's a reoccurring thought in my meditation. And that's the truth, right? I worry about the curly hair. So you're going to find that you have these silly things that come up and you're like, I cannot believe I'm wasting time on this silly thought and it's constantly coming up for me, right? Oh, there you are, curly hair thought. I bow to you. Thank you. Thank you for teaching me, right? And that's the idea. Just lighten things up. Like when you notice these repetitious thoughts, let them be, right? Let them be there, acknowledge that they're there, and let them go away, all right? That's our normal. We mentioned that already. The thought stream is in everyone, each of us, right? And we know that if we're getting caught up in thought, that our friends and families and children and our, you know, the woman at the grocery store, everybody gets caught up in thought. And it makes us feel more compassionate when we know that we're dealing with somebody that might be completely lost in thought. And we've all had those experiences. So we're asked to hold these thoughts lightly, just like cradling a little infant, right? My daughter has test anxiety, and the night before the test, and she's a very good student, but she just has this anxiety that comes up. And I said, Sophia, when you have these anxious thoughts come up, just close your eyes and imagine pulling your brain and holding your brain out into these hands, these loving hands, these lightly touching hands, and just kind of holding this anxiety with care and kindness and love. And when you notice that love surrounding, that compassion surrounding any thoughts that you feel entangled in, when you feel those thoughts soften up, just pretend you put the brain back inside your skull, back inside your head, drop it back in, right? So just using these visualizations, holding your thoughts lightly. Because the point isn't to get rid of thoughts. Remember that. We are human beings having a human experience, and the mind is an organ inside of each of us. So the mind's job is to think. That's pretty interesting, right? So when you notice a difficult thought rise up, when you notice that it feels really sticky, when it feels like it has like its claws in you, isn't that interesting? That thought is here. Just like anger is present, joy is present, right? Those that have figured out ways in which to work with the thoughts moving in the mind, these people are free. And though I have glimpses of that freedom, and I trust it, and I trust these practices to get me there, I can't say that I found that absolute freedom. I hope to someday. And I know that this is the way to achieve it, right? But when I'm wise enough to notice that I've been pulled away from any given moment and I'm lost in the trance of thinking, I too experience freedom, and so can you. And lastly, it's very, very important that we don't always believe our thoughts. These stories inside that we carry, and sometimes for many, 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 many years, these stories that we carry, these stories that we tell ourselves about how things are or how things should be they're not always necessarily true. And this is particularly important when we're dealing with acquaintances, with coworkers, when we're in a work environment where, you know, we know each other, but we may not intimately know each other, right? And we may not know anything about each other's past or history or challenges that we're facing or disappointments or joys. And so it's really easy to come to conclusions in the mind, these stories in the mind that want to make sense of things, right? We want to make sense of the world around us, of the people around us. And when you catch yourself in a story that your mind's telling you about a difficult situation or a difficult person or a tough conversation or interaction, or even just energy, right? Like we know when somebody is in a negative kind of pattern stuck there, we could feel that energy, right? And then we might feel like we did something wrong. And that could be hard. Confrontation is not something I'm comfortable with. So I'll often find myself lost in these assumptions and stories. And I have to remind myself consciously that I don't always have to believe my thoughts. That's when we know we need to have a conversation. We need to sit and talk, right? So these thoughts can serve us. Thoughts can serve us, but they could also imprison us. And it's up to us to decide, each of us, each of you. It's up to you to decide if you want to be imprisoned by your thoughts, this monkey mind, or if you would like to experience freedom. There's another quote here that I wanted to mention. It's a fun quote. There's a monkey in my mind swinging on a trapeze, reaching back to the past or leaning into the future, never standing still. Sometimes I want to kill that monkey, shoot it square between the eyes, so I won't have to think anymore or feel the pain of worry. But today I thanked her, and she jumped down straight into my lap, trapeze still swinging as we sat still. Kaveri Patel. So we're going to do a short practice just for a minute. I'm going to time you. I'm going to set my timer right now. And while we're sitting in this practice for just a minute, I want you to count how many thoughts move through your mind. So just concentrating on the mind. So we don't have to set up too much for this practice. So just sit up nice and tall and close your eyes and begin counting. And stop. And now, if you wouldn't mind just sharing how many thoughts, you could just chat it in for me. If you guys could all just share how many thoughts you counted, that would be great. So if you could just go down to your chat box and share your number. Yes, repeats count. Yeah. The repeats are interesting, right? Good. 3. 125. I love it. 25. So I still love it. At least 10. Yes, noises are thoughts. 34. 52. Good. Anybody else want to share? So here's the thing with all these thoughts that we're counting is 17, I see, is, you know, it's hard to count a thought. Ian mentioned the repeated thoughts, right? You could just have one repetitive thought and notice it, and it could extend the whole time in that 1 minute. So maybe that whole minute was spent on this one thought that you couldn't let go of. 37, 5, good. And maybe those 2 thoughts, I think somebody had the number 2, 5, right? Those are lower numbers comparatively speaking. 87, good, right? And maybe those 5 thoughts or those 2 thoughts just lasted a really, really, really long time, right? And maybe the 87 thoughts were just glimpses. There's no right or wrong way to notice. What I can tell you that is that the more each of you notice, the more each of you practice this, the more space will open up between the thoughts. The thoughts never go away. There are mornings that when I sit for my practice, especially, you know, when I'm really busy with something with work or something with, you know, my family going on, busy day ahead, if I'm traveling, you know, the mind gets really, really agitated and the mind's really busy. And I might have 300 thoughts in my practice. I don't know. I'm just throwing out a number. Right. And then there will be mornings where, you know, my mind feels spacious and calm and relaxed and not tethered to anything. And, you know, that's great. But the point is, whether my mind is busy or my mind is feeling spacious and open, I could still practice and work with what is. And then I know I can look, right? Which of these thoughts, if the mind's really busy and I'm struggling a little there, I could also notice how that it has pulled in the heart, how it's pulled up some feelings or emotions, where this tension or stress or anxiety might be residing in my body. And then I could really map out my day accordingly. And that's what this is about. You know, if I know in my formal practice time that, you know, I'm off today, I feel overwhelmed, I haven't been attending to my own self-care, I can navigate the day differently. When my mind's feeling really focused and relaxed and calm, hey, that might be a great day to face something that I've been putting off, right? So we can start making decisions for ourselves that have a lot of intelligence and wisdom behind them, and caring for ourselves in a level that we've never done before. And it's a really honest way to live and go about life. Because then we know, hey, today's not the day to have this really difficult conversation. This morning, I had a confrontation early in the day with somebody I work with. And I said, hey, I need a timeout. Like, I can't talk about this right now. I don't have the capacity to respond appropriately. But here I am teaching you guys. I'm just kidding. So, you know, we have these moments, and that felt really good to be really honest. Like, hey, I don't trust that I could respond in the way that I want to respond right now. So let's take a time out. And let's table this for a day where I'm feeling more steady. Right? How transformative is that? How transformative can that be for each of you? So we have 12 minutes. I wanted to open this up for questions. This is our last session together, Group A. Christine, I'm going to unmute you. And we can take any questions you have on any of the material that we've covered. And for the next, 8 or 9 minutes, let's just open it up for questions and answers. And then we'll just kind of review, what do you guys do now moving forward? What's the next step? So let's talk about questions first, because some of you may have questions just on that. Should we try to just unmute everyone? Okay. Oh, that's a good one, Ian. What is the easiest way to overcome the thought that I'm doing it wrong at the beginning of my practice? Right. So I still have moments when I sit to practice where I get curious about that for myself. And that's the truth. Like, is this right? I think what really helps is just to acknowledge that there's uncertainty. I'm not certain, or I feel like a beginner. Just naming it for what it is. Noting and naming and acknowledging whatever's coming up, especially when we're being really critical, turning towards that and just kind of saying, okay, this is here right now, right? I'm not feeling super confident that I know that I'm doing this right. This practice is a little intimidating, and I don't have a teacher here to tell me that I'm doing it right. But if we just look towards that question, like that big question, and just acknowledge it and send some metta and compassion to yourself, then that transforms it. It loosens its grip over, it takes away the power of the question, right? Of that uncertainty. Because then we think, okay, right? We could watch it fade away. So it's not a problem that it's coming up at all. It's very, very normal. And it comes up for every single student I've ever worked with, including myself. So just not pushing it away, just acknowledging that it's there and acknowledging that it's going to come up again, and then deciding, and then just witnessing that pass, I think is the key. Christine, do you have anything else to say on that?
Yes, the very fact that the question has come up, am I doing this wrong, tells me that you're already aware. Just having the awareness.
Christine, I'm having trouble hearing you. Is anyone else having trouble? Okay, go ahead. It must just be me for some reason.
Okay, so the very fact that you have the awareness of the question, that you're wondering, am I doing this wrong, tells me that thus far your mindfulness practice is working, because the awareness is there. And so that's to be applauded. So when it comes up, you're mindful of it. And then really the question is, what am I going to do with this insight? Or what am I going to do with this? And just as Jen said, allowing it to be there. And the third thing that I would say is, you can't do this wrong. You can't do this wrong.
Yes, excellent point. That when we note whatever we're noticing, even when we're noticing that we're pulled away or lost in thought, I remember in the beginning being really hypercritical when I found myself lost in a story. Any story or sound or like imagination. And I would be hypercritical of that. And that's a moment of mindfulness. So that's actually noticing. Any other questions? Okay, here's another question coming in. Is it better to meditate in the AM or PM? That's a great question. So the most important thing for each of you to know is that as long as you're getting it in, For some of you, an AM practice might be really great. Maybe you're a morning person like me, and it feels like it fits good on your schedule. For others, you may not be a morning person, right? And you maybe need the meditations more at night before you go to bed, especially if you have trouble sleeping or kind of calming down after a long day. It's just a personal decision. It's a personal choice. It doesn't, some people, I have a student that is an executive, and she brings a cushion into her office and she just closes the door. And whenever she has a pocket of time in the afternoon, that's when she sits. So it just depends, like what your schedule's like, you know, how it feels with your natural rhythms, which practices feel most potent or impactful. So if you're not sure, Bonnie, just try it. Short practices in different times of the day and see which ones are working the best. Christine, did you have anything to say about that?
Another thing to consider, if your schedule allows, is when do I most need the practice? There's a certain time of day. I've read about this. It's actually known as the witching hour. It's sort of after work, and it's between ending your work day and coming into your evening, that can just feel very anxiety provoking. It's just this time of day. It's sort of like dusk. And for me, if I can do a meditation practice at that time of day, it really, really helps me. So if there are and sometimes it doesn't mean a full-blown sit. It can just be taking a moment and doing one of these micro practices, because I know that I get very vulnerable to stress and overwhelm. I know that my mindset can kind of be like the runaway train around that time of day. And it does not matter how long I've been practicing. And there are days where I do my morning practice and then I add in an evening practice, just because I have the time or the desire.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say, which will address another kind of piggyback question that came up, is, someone mentioned that they feel like they rely on the guided meditations in the Insight Timer tool, or whichever app you guys might be using or most comfortable with. That's awesome. If you're dropping into a guided meditation every day, and just kind of dropping in the self-led meditations when you feel more confident, there's nothing wrong with that. My husband has been using Headspace for 2 years. That's his practice every day for 10 minutes, and I always try to encourage him, because I think that the depth of the practice really changes when we learn to work with kind of these tools that we've been teaching you on your own. The guided meditations are awesome. They're very good. And they could be super effective to getting you into that next space of feeling confident or more, more comfortable. The other thing is the 10% Happier podcast is so good. There's other podcasts out there on meditation, but I particularly like Dan Harris and the guests that he brings in. So, seek out different ways of learning these methods from other awesome teachers. There's so many resources online and free access to free teachings and guided meditations and writings and storytelling and all of these things. And for me, like Christine was saying, sometimes she'll do an evening practice. I don't practice ever in the evening. It's just not if I try to, I typically fall asleep because I get up really early. But if I find that I've had a particularly overwhelming day, I'll drop into a podcast or listen to, there's a Tibetan monk that does some chanting that I really, really love. And her music is just very calming to me. So you could find something that you could connect with, even a quiet walk. I love to be outside in nature after work. Like if I have a particularly overwhelming day, I walk through the field. So there's always something you could do if you don't have the capacity to sit and meditate. Any other questions? I'll take one more question if anyone has it. Okay, well, if I see a question come in, I'll address it. But so what do you do from here? So the portal that we've been using, and really because of you guys, that's why we have integrated it into our signature training, our 8-week signature training. So we just want to thank you for that, because we feel like it's completed, not completed, but it's opened up this new part of our business where we feel really confident in the portal, and we're going to have a customized solution that we'll be rolling out over the next year. But you guys are going to have access to that portal for quite some time. So I can't, announce like kind of what's next as far as Sundance Vacation goes yet. We're kind of working out those details. But you could go back into the portal and start over if you wanted to at lesson 1. I find that to be really, really a great method when I'm learning new techniques, especially in these more esoteric Eastern concepts and ideas, because you have gone through 8 full lessons now. So when you listen back in to lesson 1 or lesson 3 or lesson 5 or whatever, you're going to hear it differently. You're going to pick up on things that you didn't pick up on when the first time you went through it. So if you haven't already done so, I would highly encourage you to go back and listen in when you have time. So all the recordings are there. All the supportive material is there. We're going to continue to update with new guided meditations, different courses potentially, and other tools that you could use to stay connected to us and to keep deepening your practice. I would also encourage you to use the Insight timer. And if you haven't downloaded it yet, consider doing so. I was on there last night, and there's 24,000 guided meditations. There's meditation music on there. There are Dharma talks. There's courses on there. So if you were looking for deeper spiritual insights into some of these practices, there's a course for that. If you were looking for the neuroscience on some of these things that we've talked about, there's a course for that with different teachers, not us. There's all kinds of things on there that you could look into. But don't give up on your daily formal practice. That's the most important piece. Daily formal practice over a long period of time, that's what makes the difference. That's what makes us feel better. Christine?
I would just like to say that I have so enjoyed being here every Wednesday afternoon for the 3 weeks to talk about mindfulness of feelings, which is one of my favorite topics. And I applaud each of you for moving through this journey with us. As you can probably tell, we're passionate about this subject matter, mostly because of the way that it's impacted our own lives and continues to impact our own lives. And to always feel free to reach out to us. You have our contact information. We're available. We are available to you. And I just wish you so much goodness as you continue along this path.
So one last thing to close our time together today. It's something we haven't introduced, but I'd like to. If you could bring your hands together, this is Anjali Mudra. And bring your hands to the third eye space, this space between the brow. And just taking a moment here in gratitude for this mind that thinks and is able to learn and gather insight and remember. This mind that can imagine and dream and create. Bring your hands to your heart center, gently pressing your thumbs against your sternum. And take a deep breath into the heart in gratitude for the capacity of the heart, this boundless capacity of the heart to love and be kind. The capacity of the heart to be compassionate the capacity of the heart to connect. And a deep bow forward towards this belly space, the space of the hara. This is the space below the navel that's full of wisdom and knowing, authenticity and truth. And this is a space known as the primordial connection to our ancestors, to the earth herself. Thank you so much. I appreciate each and every one of you. And I look forward to staying in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.